We have a panel discussion coming up here. It's a crop rotational panel, a farmer perspective. We have Terry J. Buss, who is the Agriculture Adaptation Specialist with Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development. He's going to be chairing the event. He started with the department back in 2002. He does work with me on pulses and soybeans as well, and has been a great asset to me as well in that role. And he's also worked as a pulse crop specialist for Alberta Agriculture, Food and Rural Development for 7 years. So I want to make sure I got that point home. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry here and let him take over this part of the session here.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so we're going to do, I'm just going to go through a few really quick slides here, and then we'll get this presentation off and start our panel discussion. Just a bit of an agenda for the panel discussion. We are going to do a short introduction of the panelists. I'll do that now. We're going to have a series of questions related to crop rotation, but bear in mind we may veer off in another direction, and we'll see where this all leads us. We're not married to these questions. If something interesting comes up at the end of the presentation, we'll try and allot about 5 minutes to take questions from the crowd. Dennis, you'll be monitoring those. If there's something really important, feel free to break in. We don't have to stick to my agenda, especially if there's something that we really need to talk about. And please don't forget to submit your questions, and we'll try and cover as many of them as we can. So first, just an introduction. Here's a little map of Manitoba. We've got 3 really well-qualified panelists today, and I'm excited and honored to introduce them to you. Our first person is Jenneth Johanson. And Jenneth hails from my area. She farms out of the Lac du Bonnet area. It's that interesting transition between Red River Valley and the forests of Ontario and the Canadian Shield. Jenneth is part of a family-owned corporation. They farm both mineral and peat soils, being that we are getting close to the forests of eastern Manitoba. Her rotations involve wheat, soy, oats, back to canola or soy and wheat, or it could be wheat, canola, rye, then soy, oats, soy, and then wheat. And frankly, there's a lot of flexibility there, which is understandable. And on their farm, they do a mixture of both conventional and minimum tillage, depending on the situation. Some of their soils are quite heavy. I'd also like to introduce Rachel Newman. And Rachel hails from the Emerson area, and Dennis made us aware of Rachel. Rachel's probably our most junior member of the farming profession. I think that's fair to say, but enthusiastic and part of a long family tradition of agriculture. She's part of a family-owned corporation as well. They grow grain and oil seeds, including wheat, oats, canola, and soybeans. Those are their primary crops. They were sugar beet growers back when we had a sugar beet industry, and they farm in the Red River Valley. And many of us are familiar with those soils and those challenges. And I suspect, she didn't indicate it, but I suspect it's a mix of conventional and some minimum tillage, depending on how flooded we are. So at least that's been the history, right, Rachel? So, and then finally we have Boris Michaleski. Sorry, Boris, with the last name. Boris comes to us out of the Keld area, just southwest of Dauphin. Boris is part of a family farm. They're growing grain and oil seeds. They have a diverse mix of crops on their farms. It includes wheat, oats, barley, canola, peas, soybeans, winter wheat, perennial ryegrass. There could be others as well. Interestingly enough, they're on the north slope of the Riding Mountains. They have a lot more topography than Jenneth would or Rachel would. And he is also practicing zero tillage for the last 20 years, which is another interesting departure from our other 2 panelists. So there is our panel. They are, I think, extremely well qualified for us to discuss this. I'm going to ask a series of questions here. We'll get started. One observation I'll make is that crop rotation is something that a lot of people talk about like it's important. It gets a lot of lip service. However, we've heard about a lot of problems over the last 2 days that not only could be remedied to some extent by crop rotation, but have been caused by a lack of crop rotation and a lack of diversity. So for each panelist, I'm going to ask the question, how important is crop rotation as a management practice on your farm, really? How important is it relative to the other things you do, really? And the first person I'll ask that question to is Boris.
I guess to answer that question, Terry, it is fairly important. Obviously there's a lot of other factors that have to go into the decisions made on the farm, but having a good crop rotation, helps deal with a number of things like weed issues, disease resistance, and obviously it ties into profitability as well.
Okay, fair answer. Thank you, Boris. And just so you know, I actually phoned some of our staff to get the pronunciation of your last name and I messed it up anyway. So I did make a real honest effort and I apologize. Jenneth, how about you? How important is it really?
It is important, but I'm going to be completely honest with the committee. At the end of the day, I have a plan, and I've been working on my rotation my entire career since I came back full-time to the farm to increase diversity, to make it more agronomically sound. But every year in October, November, when I start doing my budget for the next crop season, and you start looking at the numbers and you start looking at your line of equipment, there's very often a degree of sway acres that might not follow what's maybe recommended from an agronomic standpoint for rotation. And it comes down to all those other factors, logistics, timing, all of those things. So it is important. We do give it a lot of lip service. I know that's why I smiled, because we do. We know that it's important, but there are many other factors that we have to consider. So,
okay, cool. I appreciate your frank honesty, you and Boris. So Rachel, how about you? How important is it really?
Very important. The first thing I learned that crop rotation was a thing was a take your kid to work day. So I just went with dad across the lawn to the shop and we're working on crop rotations today. Okay, I don't know what that is. So yeah, it's very important, like sitting down in the fall doing the crop rotation. Okay, this is what it's been the last 3-4 years. This is what it should be this year. Sometimes commodity prices do sway a little bit, but really we just keep to what should be there the next year, just to have a good rotation, good practice of every factor involved.
Okay, thanks very much. Going on to our next question, this will build quite nicely out of this. And Jenneth, I'm going to get you to start on this one. What are the biggest challenges with following the crop rotation that you dream about?
Well, I listed some of them in answering the other.
Yeah.
Equipment lineup, what access to equipment you have, depending on what you're looking at, like corn and sunflowers have been on my radar for years. Would love to give it a try. I don't have a planter. I haven't made that leap into that investment yet. I don't have a drying system or access to natural gas. So when I'm looking at corn, so that's problematic. Other things, like I said, logistics, timing of seeding, and yeah, that's pretty much the main factors anyways that cause a challenge. In addition to that, the economics, and weather. So when I came back full time, I'm gonna date myself on the Manitoba Agronomists Conference, which is terrible. But over 15 years ago, it was very wet where I live, and a canola crop couldn't survive, and we had to make some tough decisions, and soybeans on soybeans, which is not something I'm proud of, but that helped carry the farm through those very, very wet years, especially as a young farmer trying to establish themselves. So am I paying for that now? Yeah, I've seen the results in lower phosphate soil phosphate levels. So, and I've had to work towards building that back up, but there are instances where you have to sacrifice some things or make trade-offs. So
yeah, and it's interesting. I thank you for making that point, because we did go through a period where it seemed like the only two things that worked were soybeans and perennial ryegrass, and a lot of people, that was the rotation. And in our area, we've had people who have eliminated canola and said they'd never grow it again, and now they've got thousands of acres of canola. The things come around. What goes around comes around, right? Yeah. How about you, Boris? What are the things that hold you back from that rotation that you'd like to do?
I'm going to say, similar to Jenneth, is that obviously commodity prices play a huge role into that, but the weather. Are we in a dry cycle? Are we in a wet cycle? And especially where our farm is located, being as far north as we are, we've got a pretty condensed season to start with. So our choices are limited. And, sometimes if we run into a late spring, a wet spring, we're forced to make rotation changes halfway through seeding because the clock is ticking and the calendar is working against us. So I would say those are probably the two main ones. And another thing that's a challenge is having a good variety of crop mixes that we can profitably grow in our area so that we can extend that rotation instead of having a wheat canola or canola snow type of rotation. And our soils also on the farm, we've got a variety of soils, so not every crop is best suited for every field. So sometimes you try to stick to a rotation, but all of a sudden, if soybeans are planned for a particular field and maybe there's some salinity issues or some other things, then all of a sudden you got to weigh out, whether it makes sense to grow beans on that field. So those are some of the issues.
Okay, good, thank you. Rachel, when you and your dad are figuring out crop rotations, what's holding you back from what causes you maybe to take a swerve and do something different?
Commodity prices and break even at the end of the day. Is it gonna pay something else, gonna pay more? But really not a lot stops us, like our wheat, oats, canola, soybean. That's usually the same every year since I've started farming. We've grown peas 2 years in fall rye once, but that's just something to try. We don't stick to it like it's a golden rule. But one thing that affects us is the flooding in the spring. Usually everything gets seeded and then we'll seed around the water, come back and seed the other part once it's dry. And usually that does stay to the same crop. If not, we're done all the wheat and everything else. Maybe we'll throw canola or soybeans in there, but as per se, it usually doesn't not do much stopping us.
Okay, cool. Just wait, it's coming, Rachel.
Yeah.
Give it some years, hey? So right on. So the next thing I'm going to ask, and it was interesting, all of you were very generous in providing me a fair bit of information about your experiences, and I greatly appreciate that. And a lot of you talked about the impact that a series of wet years we had. I think it was 04 to like 2010. There's a bit of variability depending where you're located, but I remember that it was like the whole world was a swimming pool. And so you talked a lot about how that wet cycle really impacted you. But in recent years, we've had we've had dry conditions. We have had dry soils. It's become a concern. It's been drier a lot longer than I ever expected it to be. I think we're like 4 years in a row. The last time it was this dry, this long, I had a mullet and I drove a Trans Am. So like it's been a long time. Are you doing anything with crop rotation to address this change? Is there something that you're modifying now because we've been in it for a while? And Boris, I'll shoot that one to you first.
So as far as, making decisions with the last few years being drier, I think our farm is potentially at an advantage being that we're primarily zero till. So obviously that was one of the main reasons that producers use zero till, especially in the semi-arid areas. It definitely does help with preserving soil moisture. I think last year it also helped with the extremely hot and dry weather. Having that trash cover, I think it helped moderate some of our soil temperatures. But as far as rotation, one of the first things, and you had alluded to it in the wet years, soybeans, perennial ryegrass. The last couple of years, I haven't grown any perennial ryegrass. It's one of those crops that loves water. It uses lots of water, so it helps with the rotation the following year, making that field drier, but it really doesn't do well on excessively dry years. So, you try to rotate crops that, do better when it is hot and dry. So obviously ryegrass is something we took out of the equation. I even noticed last year the oats we had didn't fare as well as wheat did. So that's factoring into some of my decisions for this coming year, especially what soil type we're putting that field in or that crop into. If it's on later soils, then you have to be more cognizant of that and really make sure that the crop fits the field that it's going on.
Okay, cool. Rachel, how about your group? Have you guys been talking about this?
Crop rotation per se for the dry years, it hasn't affected us, but it's the tillage practices that we're looking at now. Normally we combine, heavy harrow, go in with a Selford vertical disc, just light duty. Then we will cultivate, then go in with our ammonia rig if the fall suits. But in the few recent years, we don't touch our soybean or our canola ground after harvest because they'll dry out quicker than a wheat or a oat stubble will. And then, yeah, those canola soybean fields, they tend to blow more. And then with the fertilizer rig that goes in, it disturbs it a little, but then still leaves trash on top for snow catch and help with wind erosion.
Okay, so your response on your farm has been more around tillage practices as opposed to changing crops or shifting them around.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sounds cool. Jenneth, what do you think? We use tillage out our way to basically dry things out. Tillage is sort of tillage, drainage by evaporation is our favorite, but that hasn't been a good idea lately.
No.
Well, how about you? Crop rotation going to help with dry conditions?
I don't think the only thing changes that I see on my crop rotation is I'll be pulling back on canola acres, and that's not so much about the moisture, it's more so to do with the risk and what's going on in our industry and supply chains right now. But I agree with Rachel and Boris. You guys both nailed it. Like, I mean, from a tillage standpoint, we did a few things a little bit differently. We did some fall anhydrous this year, which would have been new to our operation. We also changed the size of shovels on our chisel plow, but we still used our chisel plow to deal with the straw that we have. I didn't have as much straw necessarily to deal with as we historically do because of the drought. And in addition, I had my straw baled off to help with some of the feed issues that we had out across the country. So. But yeah, some of these, mostly tillage, I mean, and then the crop rotation, I'm a little nervous about oats, seeing how oats responded to the drought and the heat of last year. So I might have pulled back on my oat acres just a little bit, but not significantly. So.
Okay, good. I appreciate your input. Now, this is one that I think is we've gone over this ground a little bit, but I'm going to ask it because I think it might give us an idea of more of the evolution over time. Obviously, your crop rotation has changed over the years. And the question I have for you is, how has it evolved over the years? What was the main driver of that? Just trying to get around what motivated it. There's a lot of reasons why we do crop rotation, but it can be things like innovation. We want to add things. We're interested in things. I have some clients who are early adopters. They try everything at least once or twice or 3 or 4 times. Other people are very much more reactive. They're market driven, or they're driven by adverse events. Kind of, I guess what I'm asking is, when it comes to crop rotation, what's kind of the motivator for you personally? And Jenneth, I'll start with you. Like, what's the thing that really has an impact on you and makes you think about changing your crop rotation?
This may make me sound terrible, but it's the economics. It's return on investment. I mean, if there's an opportunity to take advantage of a better ROI with one specific crop, that is something that plays into account. Spreading risk, spreading, like I said, the workload and the logistics, just timeliness and harvest management, how to get one from one crop type to the other in a timely manner when you're not putting some of your production at risk by not getting there in time and stuff like that. So those things also start coming into play when I'm making changes to my crop rotation. Historically, well, when I was a teenager, we had 20 to 25 20 to 25% of our acres were forage seed production acres. We don't have forage seed production at all in our farm anymore. That has changed over time. And again, that was driven a lot by weather impacts and excess of moisture years. It also was due to labor force, because it was labor intensive, right? With the leaf cutter bees required to get out there and pollinate. So changes like that have happened because of that. And I see more changes coming along, because we're in the egg industry heading to a timeline where labor in the egg industry is going to be very, very hard to source. So farmers are going to be more heavily reliant on mechanizations, technologies that can make processes just that much more efficient and timely.
You know, and I appreciate you offering some of future vision there. That's very interesting. And I'd say, you know, be proud of the fact that you want to make money. I think that was what I was hoping I can help you with. So that's great. Boris, how about you? What do you think's influenced you the most in the past when you thought about crop rotation? And I'd invite you as well. What do you think's going to influence you the most in the future? Let's build on that as well.
Well, you know, obviously economics, as Jenneth had mentioned, and the number at the bottom of the spreadsheet is a pretty big motivator and deciding factor on how you plan your rotation. But, you know, looking beyond that, you know, obviously there's a number of reasons you want to have a good rotation, and, you know, whether it's soil health or, you know, weed management, maybe water use efficiency. So you're making decisions, are we on a dry season, a wet season, that sort of thing. You know, over the years, our rotation has evolved somewhat. You know, we've tried different crops. We've quit growing some others. When we were in a wet cycle, we grew different crops than we go now. You know, going forward, you know, I think there's going to be other crops. Corn is something new to our area, being in kind of a fringe area. I would assume that with, you know, the research going on in plant breeding, that there will be varieties coming forward in the next number of years that we can regularly grow a profitable crop. So, you know, always looking for that opportunity to try something new. Hopefully it's profitable, but it's not just economics that has to drive it. It has to fit the farm, whether it's the workload, you know, timing of harvest, being able to handle it. You know, with corn, you're looking at a dryer, lots of storage. So there's a lot of things that factor into it.
Okay, cool. Rachel, I especially want to ask you, because you're going to be probably doing this when I'm gone, because I'm pretty old. I just lost a lot of weight recently, so don't be fooled by what you see. The camera is very nice to me. But in your case, you're going to be doing this for a while. What do you think the future holds for crop rotation? How do you think things are going to change?
I think a big driver right now is the soil health and the cover crop and the intercropping. Yeah, they would be interesting to try, like a cover crop, and you hear about it and it's good for the soil health. It'll be good for over winter, but I'm looking at it, okay, we're busy trying to harvest and we're trying to get field work done. When are we going to have the time to go out and see this cover, and just the cost and the return of it? Like, am I going to go spend $50 an acre seeding a cover crop, and like I'm not going to get any cash out of that? My soils will be better, which is good because we can't make more soil. But that's one of the biggest things I see. Corn really seems everybody's growing more corn every year. I think a big thing for us is manpower. We don't have a planter. We don't have anything set up for corn, and manpower is the biggest thing. I think maybe some longer season crops as well, since we are down south 2 miles away from the border. Pretty warm down here. Corn, soybean, longer season soybeans would work, but I don't see overall it's like drastic changes. I really don't see too much changing.
Okay, all right, fair enough. And actually, I'm going to bounce this back to Jenneth and Boris, either one of you. We just had mentioned something I wanted to ask about, and I'm not asking about this as an advocate, but rather because I'm someone who struggles with advising clients on these two topics. Cover crops, green manures, intercrops. Have either of you tried anything with these? And if so, how'd that go? How does that fit? And if not, why not? Go ahead, Jenneth.
There you go. It's a great question, and no, I've not done intercropping, but I've been watching the pea oat research that's been going on. I'm finding it very interesting. However, in my region, my father many years ago tried piola, which pea and canola intercropping, and that didn't pan out very well. The peas did quite horribly in our region. So I'm watching it, but I'm kind of hesitant to dive in both feet. The cover crop, again, and I mean, Cindy's presentation yesterday was great, but I struggle how, like Rachel said, if you're not to spend more money, if you can't actually put a number on what that return is to your farm. And if it is soil health, if we have tools to measure the increase in soil health and the benefit, then it would make it easier to justify the cost of going through the process, time, resources, fuel, all of that. So this year, inadvertently, I didn't actually do a cover crop, but as it has been mentioned, we had significant amount of regrowth with the late rains that we had, specifically on my oat land. Some of it had shattered, and then we had the wind up with the combines, right? So we threw a little bit more over. And it looked like it had been seeded. And I know Jason Vogt touched on this as well in his presentation yesterday, is that at the end of the day, I got more worried and more concerned about the moisture and the nutrients that volunteer oats was taking up, that we ended up spraying it out. So whether that's the right or wrong decision, I have no idea. So.
So one of the things I'm hearing you say is that there's still quite a lack of information for someone who farms the way that you do, in terms of, I don't know what we call it, a conventional farming system, perhaps?
Yeah, there's gaps in information, and if there is research out there and I haven't seen it, then if anyone knows of it, send it my way, because I'd be interested. But putting a monetary value, and I know it's not all about money, but we have to be able to justify what we're doing. And again, Rachel kind of touched on it as well with her changes to crop rotation coming down the pipeline. Federal policy might really have an important role on how we determine to do certain things, and cover crops might play a factor, or dual cropping or what have you as well. So, but I don't know exactly what that looks like just yet.
Sure. Yeah. Boris, I'm interested to know, have you tried some of these things?
Well, I guess as far as green manure crops, the last time they were on our farm was when my dad was farming and we still had cattle, and and that had a fit back in the day when not everybody did continuous cropping. But as practices changed and people switched their operations over to a continuous cropping system, that basically did away with any need for cover crops or for green manure crops. As far as cover crops, I haven't tried any. I've been interested in them. Over the years, I've grown winter wheat, perennial ryegrass, sweet clover, those sorts of things. And, maybe in our northern climate, that's almost like a de facto cover crop, because it's some of it is a perennial, it's there over winter, it's something that's growing late in the fall. And, you can get 2 years out of it. Some of the grasses, you can get more out of it. So, that maybe potentially almost mimics a cover crop to some extent, but I think cover crop is definitely something that interests me. It's a very common practice in the US, even in Ontario, but I think what our challenge is our northern climate and short growing season. So to establish a cover crop after harvest and have enough growth prior to freeze up for it to give any, organic matter benefits or nutrient benefits, I think is going to be a real challenge. Maybe the future will bring varieties that maybe we're seeding cover crops halfway through the summer in the standing crop to try to get them developed so that we're actually getting some reasonable growth. But, hopefully research will bring some of those options to the table.
Sure. Okay. Sounds good. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. So Dennis, unless there's questions you want to break in with, I'm going to move on to a few additional questions. Just let me know.
Yeah, you go right ahead and break into those questions, Terry. We still got about another 10 minutes or so yet before we can call it then. So.
Okay. Another one I want to move on to, and this one, we're about crop rotation, but I'm interested in kind of getting your long-term view. I characterize a lot of what I hear on my side of the industry. A lot of it's talking about the threats, and that tends to be kind of an orientation of agronomy. We talk about diseases and insects and what's going to eat your crop next, and here's the next problem. But what's your perspective on that? What's the big threat to your long-term economic and ecological sustainability? What do you see coming that is the one that stands out the most in terms of a concern? Jenneth, maybe I'll lead off with you. What do you think?
Some of the threats coming long-term, well, there's a number of them, but Terry, just to point out, threats are awfully negative. With change, there's always often opportunity that comes with it. So it doesn't always have to be a negative thing. But like looking down the pipeline, we've touched on a few, access to labor. Specifically for my region, we're with the Lactobonnet River system right here, the Winnipeg River system, the increased interest in the cottage and tourism industry. We're starting to see a shift even at our local government level of where the priorities are in regards to services and stuff like that. Farm drain or municipal drainage to assist farm drainage in wet years like that. That's not necessarily the driving concern now. So there's changes there, and learning how to adapt to that, and also be a part of the community, work with how it's kind of changing from a small town rural community to more of a bustling tourist community. So that's one. Again, policy right now, the government of the day is pushing a lot of initiatives, and it was brought up yesterday in one of the comments, reduction of fertilizer across the board. I hope that that's not the case. Farmers will have to adapt either by equipment or by providing data to prove their practices. So that could be a challenge as well, or a potential threat, but again, also an opportunity to grow and to learn and to adapt. So those are a few.
Okay, cool. How about you, Boris?
I guess as far as threats, I would say kind of the primary threats that face all producers is, obviously crop prices, input costs, and land costs. Those are kind of the drivers that set our cost and revenue models. So then, we're trying to make crop rotation choices that allow us the revenue to still function in that high cost environment. So, I think that's part of the problem with those three key factors, why we've gotten into a tight rotation scenario across the prairies. Producers are, basically forced to make a bad choice so they can make ends meet. Hopefully having a diversified rotation that's profitable will bring other benefits with it, but the crop prices that exist right now have not been the norm over the last 10 years. And I guess it's a question whether we're going to see those types of prices in the future. So, the financial, that cost squeeze is always a big concern, and that always plays a big factor in what our crop rotations look like.
Okay, right on. Rachel, what are you thinking about in terms of a future threat or future threats? What's the big thing that you think is going to play a role in influencing you?
Weed resistance. I think for environmental nature factors, I think weed resistance is the biggest one. I think the next one after that would be man-made factors, but I think it's mostly weed resistance. You hear about it and you hear about it and you're like, oh, I don't have any resistant weeds. It's okay. And then this summer we were scouting. It was a new field, our first year renting it. We had canola in there, and okay, there's a strip of pigweed. That's kind of weird. So then later on, it was still there. So went in and what is this? And I'm like, Dad, it's not pigweed. So we called the local agronomists out and they weren't too sure. And then got a hold of Tammy and she came out and she basically looked at it from the truck and said, that's water hemp. Oh, crap. Okay. So yeah, now we've got resistant weeds on the farm as of last summer. And it was in more, once you know what it looks like and how to identify it, then I noticed it in another field of ours and in a neighbor's field, and then not far down the road in any direction, neighbors have resistant kochia or there's resistant ragweed. So I think the biggest thing is going to be resistant weeds and having people take it more seriously, not, wow, let's just spray Roundup on everything 2-3 times a year, switch things up, more mechanical tillage, different methods. But yeah, one of the scariest things for me is weed resistance coming up.
So you've mentioned some things that you can do in response. What is your operations plan?
So when we found the water hemp, it was in canola. The next year plan for that field was oats, but we put wheat in there so we could use Treflan and Avidex in the spring, get that down right away. And because there was more herbicide options in wheat. We're on 4-inch row spacing on our seeder, and we get a mechanical tillage pass as we're seeding. So I think for us that really helps because we've got crop plants everywhere, so we can close our canopy pretty fast and there's more crop competition with it. But I think for us, it's just keep on a good crop rotation, be aware of the chemicals we're using and how we can rotate them along with the crop rotation.
Okay. I'm going to throw this one back at the rest of the panel. Jenneth, have you experienced these weeds yet? And whether you have or not, are you changing practices to prepare?
Yeah. Am I doing enough? Maybe, perhaps not. But I was at a field day pre-COVID, and Tammy was saying, if what you're doing right now is working, you should change it up. And I took it quite seriously, specifically when you're talking about resistant weeds and stuff like that. So definitely paying more attention to the herbicide rotations, switch the beans into extend beans, like another option is just away from the straight Roundup Ready first gen, so that we have another option to go in with the dicamba as well. But yeah, it's definitely something that I'm keeping my eye out, and I haven't found anything here yet, but it's very much so in my backyard. So it could be next year where I walk in and find either water hemp and now we've got the Palmer amaranth, right? I think I got that right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a real threat. Like that's. I think we should all just operate under, or at least I should operate under the assumption that I already have it. I may not have found it, I already have it. So I might as well implement some best practices on how to deal with that.
Sure. Boris, how about you? What's been your experience, and are you preparing a response?
Well, as far as weed resistance, I think it's something all producers need to have on the top of their mind always. For myself, kind of the approach I've had is crop rotation has a huge impact on reducing, development of weed resistance. Not only getting a variety of crops, but I try to design my my crop rotations so that by default it's also my herbicide rotation. That way, I'm not, using back-to-back years that I'm using the same group of chemistry. We're growing soybeans, so that means I'm not growing Roundup Ready canola. I'm growing a Liberty type canola. So we're trying to make sure that we're not doubling up applications of similar groups of chemistry. And, we're growing some peas in our rotation now, so that primarily puts us in a group 2. So I try to make sure I'm not using that same chemistry in other parts of the rotation. And when it comes to doing a pre-seed burn-off, we're typically adding something else in with our glyphosate. Sure, we're not, encouraging escapes to occur. So those are some of the things we're doing on a regular basis.
Okay, right on. Dennis, I've exhausted my sheet of questions.
Well, that's perfect because we have 3 more from the audience.
Oh,
here,
right
so
on.
Perfect timing. The first one is, I'll throw this up to the group, but I guess it's a bit of a loaded question based on one of the conversations we had on earlier today. So the question is, do you manage your farm differently for the rented land versus what you own with respect to crop rotation?
So, okay, Jenneth, I saw your microphone flicker, so go ahead.
There you go. I'll take it. The straight up truth is, depends on the length of the lease and the relationship with the landowner. Yeah, there can be a variation, but most of my rented lands, I've had long-term leases and great relationships with the landowners. So they get the soil sampling every year. They get the full fertility package. They get the same rotation. Yeah, I think it all depends. But if you're dealing with a 1-year lease, well, you might not invest as much as you would versus a long-term, something that you have the potential to farm for 20, 25 years. So.
Any comments from either Rachel or Boris on that one?
Not really. I mean, I haven't been doing this that long. We picked up 2 quarters. It's been 2 years now. We've had each of them crop rotations been the same. We found out what was on there previous and then just did what was best for the next season. The one thing though, this fall we had a leftover canola blend with sulfur in it. So we said, okay, instead of putting that extra sulfur on the rented piece, let's just put it on stuff we own. But as of right now, that's the only thing we've done different, but it all gets treated the same as the stuff we do own.
And Boris, you were going to make a comment.
An ideal situation, I think a person should be treating rented land no different than your own. Obviously, you want to make decisions that are sound decisions agronomically. But as Jenneth had mentioned, how long is that rent term? If it's a long-term lease and you have a good understanding with the landowner, that goes away. If it's a short-term lease, or if you farm in an area where there's a lot of competition on land, and I've been in a scenario where you lose some acres that you have, and if you treat them like your own, then all of a sudden you kind of pay the price when you lose that land and you've done somebody else a favor. So I think one of the key things to avoid getting into that situation is to have a good relationship with the landowner and sitting down with them and saying, explaining what some of the costs are to maintain proper fertility in the soil and to maintain a rotation. And something that's probably not very common, but I think those types of discussions and conditions have to become part of future rent contracts, so that when you're renting new land, you need to soil test it, look at what's in that land. And if a person is going to farm it properly, try to build up that soil so that if in 10 years time or 5 years time, you're no longer farming that land and you've invested money into improving it, you get paid for it. Or if you're a bad farmer and you're mining the soil and somebody else takes it over in 5 years, then you end up paying the check for mining that guy's land. And I think those are types of things that seriously need to be looked at in the future.
Back to you, Dennis.
We'll do one last question here, and then we'll call that a wrap after that. So the question comes in. It says, in terms of soil health, what property are you most interested in or think would be the most benefit to your operation if it could be enhanced. So with respect to soil health.
Who'd like to grab that one? Go ahead, Boris.
I'll take a stab at it. You know,
Sure.
soil health incorporate a number of factors. You know, obviously the things like organic matter, but you know, improving the health of the soil, you know, can include other properties, water retention, water use availability, and obviously nutrients. You know, having a good baseline for all your major macronutrients goes a long way in making that soil healthy. And if you can grow a good crop and you get the residue back in the soil and grow a good rotation of crops that brings a variety of residue into that soil, hopefully long term that means we're going to have a good healthy soil that's going to be profitable and sustainable for us in the future.
Any other comments from the group? Or
I think Boris, you pretty much nailed it. And we've seen with controlled traffic farming, or I've seen the research, even just from a compaction standpoint, the increase in soil tilth and stuff like that. So any process that increases that soil tilth should, in theory, help you grow better crops, right? So whether it be increasing the nutrients or increasing the organic matter or what have you. So, but you nailed it. You got all the high points.
alrighty, well, I think we'll wrap it up at that point. We're right at the mark here, but I thank you all, Terry and Boris and Jenneth and Rachel, for coming on. I think it was a very good discussion here today.